All right, everyone. So we are going to our last project that I am grading, the last 3-point assignment of the semester. And it's digital painting, which I leave for the end because it's actually the most basic, but also the most kind of hard to wrestle with of the digital art disciplines. The reason it's the most basic is there's no particular workflow you need to remember. There aren't any particular actions or functions or even a lot of tools that we need to use. We're just going to use the brush and build up pixels just like we are building up paint on a canvas. But there's a lot that can go into it, and it's used with almost every other digital art method we've talked about. So we've talked about compositing, we've talked about vector imaging, we've talked about digital coloring and digital inking. Digital painting is now the thing that can be used with all of those other things, even on top of 3D modeling, right? In order to get digital art to be what you want. So we start with a question of the day. This question of the day, you have a couple class periods to still work on it. We can always look at the course outline and see when things are due, right? And I encourage you to, because we're in our final weeks of the semester. So we're not going to have a whole lot of time for this digital painting. So it's not super important that you finish it to your complete satisfaction. It's more important, so we're starting it here on November 18th. It's going to be due on November 25th, right? So we only get one full day to work on it next class. Question of the day 4 is part of that, and you're going to want to get all your questions of the day submitted by November 27th. That's your last chance to get credit for them, right? But notice we only get one full day to work on this digital painting after we set it up today, so you don't want to choose something that's super, super ambitious. The whole point is just to introduce you to the basics about this methodology. So if you want to use it for your final project, you may. So here is a question that kind of sets it up. What sort of difficulties does digital art commonly run into about its value and validity that traditional art media doesn't usually have to deal with? And I give you examples of synthetic media, which is a better name for the generative image technology, because it's not actual artificial intelligence. It's just using large language models to synthesize things that are close to what you're asking for. Authenticity, authorship, mass production, etc. So as an example, new technology like computers, like the stable diffusion image generators, they are just the newest version of ways that technology makes things more convenient, but it also hurts the quality of those things. This started in our recent history with the 4-color offset lithography press, right? And we've talked about 4-color separation. Well, newspapers, which are just printed with black ink on newsprint, which print so much faster on professional lithography presses because they use aluminum photo plates, those really started around the 1940s. And by the time you got to the 1960s, those were such a mainstay, those kind of low resolution, they're 150 pixels per inch, printed images or dots per inch in the printing on newsprint. It's still the way we do high-speed printing today for newspapers, right? But that technology was around in the 1960s when you had a new art movement called pop art happening in fine art circles and in galleries in New York and in California. And this artist, Andy Warhol, the day after Marilyn Monroe committed suicide, her obituary photo was published in the New York Times newspaper. And Andy Warhol took that low quality, black and white, half-tone printed grayscale photo of Marilyn Monroe, enlarged it with a photo process, because this was before computers in the 60s, and made silk screens of them. And made a silk screen of that obituary photo, and then flooded the additional shapes of the silk screen with these really, really vibrant colors. And there are hundreds and hundreds of these variations of his Marilyn series. And what he was doing is commenting on celebrity, commenting on the devaluation of celebrity. As it gets reproduced, it starts to fade and fade and fade. but the whole thing that makes celebrity is seeing an image over and over and over again, right? And he's using her obituary photo, which is very different than using like a publicity still. And that's pop art, right? And that enters into its own dialogue of art history. But that was using the kind of cheap, reproducible technology of its day that made image making more convenient, but lower quality. Now, let's move forward to 2014 when the U.S. Postal Service wanted to do a Marilyn Monroe stamp, and they opened up a contest to artists to submit entries for a Marilyn Monroe stamp. And what did the artists do? Well, they use digital art at this point, and they create images that are inspired by Andy Warhol's low-quality, silkscreen portraits, which were intentional, but they're doing it in digital art now. And then you move forward, 10 years to 2024, and if we take a little screen grab of one of these, now do we not only use Photoshop and digital techniques to kind of work over a photograph of Marilyn Monroe that the USPS Post Office gave to licensed and gave to their artist to paint over, but we can use AI generative technology. Like one of my favorites is one called Dream Wombo. And why I like this one is you don't even need to sign in to use it. It's what we used. You just go to create. It's what we used with our exercise 0 when you made a digital avatar. And what I can do is just put in a pop art, colorful, cubist portrait of Marilyn Monroe. And this uses its training data, make it as a cartoon, which is from scouring the internet, a whole lot of copyrighted material. And it's not compositing from any of those sources. Instead, it's using them, first coding all of those images into text, and then coding them back into precise pixel to create what's called a stable diffusion image. I don't know why it's taking so long. So let me copy this. It's the problem with freeware is sometimes it can take a while. So I'm going to open it up in a new tab like we sometimes do. And I wanted to copy over this. There we go. We'll close this one. And we'll just put it in, and then I'll just use the default art style. And we'll see if it gives us something, right? Now, this takes out all of the knowledge of digital art and of using programs like Photoshop, and it gives us something so similar, right, that I can download. So similar to, at a pretty high resolution too, to what was submitted by digital artists for a national campaign in 2014. Why? Because technology mostly profits on making things more convenient. But the question is, does it make it higher quality, right? So this is what this question today is getting to. Because I can do that, and anyone can do that with AI, we tend to value this image a lot less. And there's little changes I would make to this. But that's a pretty decent version of the job. It's just not the version that any human foresaw. Does that make sense? And you can get entry-level jobs now in prompt engineering, which is figuring out the right prompt to try to get the thing you want, and just doing it over and over and over again until you get the thing you want. But it's a very different type of making images with the computer, right? So at the end of the day, it doesn't give you control of what you get, but it gives you something that's very similar to what you're asking for. Now, the more famous the subject matter, right, the more that there is online about them. You can see that this is overwhelmingly using the same hairstyle, the same jewelry, the same general composition and pose, because that's what's most prevalent in the training data. But why I like this one is because I can assert a little bit more control about what's done. Because you can scroll to the bottom and you can upload a reference image. And it's designed for a phone screen, so that's the aspect ratio of it, which is vertical, which can be a little annoying. But now it will do a version based on that really blurry screen grab I gave you, or I put into it. And in this way, I can push it to be more creative or less creative in terms of how it replicates that reference image. And this is not a finished project, right? But that is a more interesting one to me than the one before. And I don't know if you agree, but do you see how it feels like there's a little bit more of a point of view in that, right? Might not be your taste, but it's not just super generic. Like I like how because I put cubist in the prompt and I gave it this reference image, which looks pretty different than this, right? But it has the hard edges and the polygons and the strange color choices. Now, if I gave this to the post office, they would say, why are her teeth gold, right? And I'd say, okay, I can fix that. And how would I fix it? Well, I couldn't fix it through AI very easily, though there are AI tools in Photoshop that can do that. I'd have to know how to use the programs. So more and more, in order to get something that you can control and you like, you want to be aware of these tools, but you want to figure out what they're good for, and what they're not good for is the finished product, right? So we're going to use it for what's called the ideation phase, for getting inspiration and reference. But for those of you interested in this and wanting more information about how image generation AI, though it's really just synthetic media, how it's grown, it started about 5 years ago, and it started with just compositing from found sources online. That's what this video is about. And then the problem with that is because it's compositing from found sources online, it will take any image. So here's one of me, and it turns it into, this is the Portrait AI app. And this is just trained on 1,000 portraits from the 1800s. But it will turn everyone into a flawless white woman in 4 steps, right? And that's because most of the training data are flawless white women. So you'll notice it first turns me into someone without glasses, because there aren't many glasses in the training data. Then it turns me into someone that's like paler, and then it turns me into a flawless white woman. And then I was curious, so I put 4 of my analog portraits. So I have Louis Armstrong, Maya Angelou, Mark Twain, and in 4 steps, sure enough, turns them all into flawless white women, right? So there's a bias based on the training data. So again, you're not able to get what you want necessarily. Marilyn Monroe might be way over represented, but if you're doing like Che Guevara, you're never going to get someone that looks like Che Guevara because you don't have as much pop art and color reproductions and things in the data set. And the data set is just the whole of the internet, right? So the compositing kind of ended about 4 years ago, and they started moving towards the large language model, ChatGPT, text-based algorithms, and stable diffusion modeling, which is what this video is about, and this video. And what's amazing about that is it produces very believable images, but without any realization of how humans actually see images, right? Which is why you have the problem with hands, because all of this is very believable, except it doesn't know what a hand is in the physical world. So when you show it with like only 2 fingers, that's because we have a lot of reference of hands that are just turned in such a way where you only see 2 fingers, things like that. So there's all these articles, and you can try text-based diffusion yourself using this. This is one of the early versions. But my favorite of these is this Dream Wombo one. And you can actually see it has its early versions, which were very basic, very small training data, some based on artists like Salvador Dali. So if I do Marilyn Monroe as a Salvador Dali painting with my reference image, you can actually see it create the pixels as you go. That's how stable diffusion works. And that was about 4 years ago. But now with larger and larger data sets, it just always kind of does the same thing. It regresses towards the mean. It's all this kind of what I call ambient aesthetic garbage, right? And it's very easy to tell what AI-generated art is because it always follows the same patterns if you're aware of it. And there are certain campaigns that use it, like the San Antonio water system is using it for